This is a presentation for the Winnipeg Philatelic Society, Western Canada's oldest stamp club, and the topic is "The New Catalogue is Here, the New Catalogue is Here." This is always an exciting time for stamp collectors because you of course hope that all the values of the stamps in your collection went up, and of course they never do. But you find out whether or not, as you've been keeping track all year long about a country you collect, if you got all the new stamps they've issued, you can now have an authoritative source to go look at. So this is about the 2023 Unitrade Canadian catalogue, and as I say, some values are up, but many stay the same. So how many Canadian stamps are there? And we kind of need to know this. How many have they issued this year compared to prior years? Is it more or less? Now the only way I can do this quickly and conveniently, and obviously wrong, and I'll talk about that in a sec, but is by catalog number. So for the first four monarchs, Queen Victoria through King Edward VIII, who had no Canadian stamps, catalog numbers 1 to 230 implies 230 different stamps. 1851 to 1936, that's 85 years and 4 monarchs. 2.7 stamps a year, 3 stamps a year, let's call it. 1937 to 1952, George VI, catalog numbers 231 to 320, 90 stamps. In 15 years, 6 per year, so the average is starting to go up. And then Elizabeth II, 231 to 3369, 3,079 stamps in 40 years of reign through 2022, 44 stamps a year on average. Now the other thing we need to contemplate is when the various post offices started to issue commemorative stamps and when they started to issue stamps to raise money from collectors by issuing collectibles. And I suppose in Canada the first commemorative issue is 1897, the Jubilee issue, with values all the way up to $5, which had no use. And they were deliberately selling these to collectors, 1897. Now, you can probably get into an argument of when the first commemorative stamp, was it the Canadian Christmas stamp? Was it the Quebec Tercentenary issue? Don't know. I'm going to pick the Jubilee issue because it went to $5, and that was a collectible. Now, as I've said, that's not the right way to count how many stamps there are, but then that requires a definition, and there's all kinds of different definitions of what a different stamp is. I define a stamp as face different. Don't concentrate that much on perfs and watermarks and stuff like that, but so it's simple. Now sometimes they skip a number. Sometimes there are 2 stamps, 31A, capital A, and 31 capital B. Sometimes there's a sheet of 10 stamps and it's a single number with A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Not all stamps are face different. You could have a booklet die cut. You have a booklet die cut to shape that comes in the annual pack. You could have the same face different, or face the same, not face different stamp in a souvenir sheet. It will be different by perforations and the kind of gum on the back. You could have an uncut press sheet. So there's lots of different types of things that the post office will now sell to you that you could buy and collect. But clearly, after the accession of George VI, we're starting to issue lots more stamps. And then after the accession of Elizabeth II, lots more, and growing and adding souvenir sheets and this and that and the other. Now, how many stamps are now being issued per year? And this is, of course, my definition. Other people can have different definitions. This is based on me counting up the number of used stamps I have in my album. And so for 2019, there are 65, including 22 far and wide stamps. In 2020, there are 55, also with 22 far and wide. 2021, there were 61 stamps, 22 far and wide, and the Chinese New Year reissue, which I don't quite understand, but there are at least 24 different stamps if you look at the tiny little dates printed. 2022, 46 stamps with no far and wide stamps this year. But you can see we're running on average ahead of the 44 stamps on average in the reign of Elizabeth II. So more stamps are coming out per year. Now, value changes. And it seems that the value of used stamps has gone up after 2018, not before 2018. Mint stamps continue to be a multiple of some kind of face value. So, for instance, the Memorial Cup stamp 3101, 1.4 million issued, was 65 cents in the 2021 catalog, is now 75 cents in the 2023 catalog. In 2019, for instance, 3165 Black History stamp, 1.5 million, about the same as Memorial Cup, gone from 65 to 75. 2020, the group of 7. Now, that's a set of 7 stamps, and there were only 180,000 of each of those 7 stamps issued, so 10 times fewer. It was valued at 75 cents. It's now 90 cents. 2020, the Eid stamp, 1.3 million, same as Memorial Cup and Black History, roughly 65 cents, but gone to 80. 2021, the Insulin stamp, 1.3 million, roughly the same as Eid and before, 80 cents. 2022, Platinum Jubilee, 6 million, so a lot more, but still a value of 80 cents. 2022, the Eid stamp, only 600,000. Is that a half or a third of what it was before? And it's at a catalog value of 90 cents. So what does this represent? What does this mean to a Canadian stamp collector? Well, I think we already knew this. It's getting harder and harder to get used stamps, used Canadian stamps, used any country stamps. And we have to note what Unitrade says. It says one source is creating used Canadian stamps using an out-of-date canceling device. And if you want to find out who that is, you just have to go to eBay and you'll see it right away. Now, what does that mean for Canada and a Canadian collector? Well, mint, how do we get them? We're going to get them the way we always got them. Though I guess one of the ways we always got them, I remember walking down to the local drugstore and buying 3 or 4 mint stamps to get myself up to date with the new Canadian stamps. You kind of can't do that anymore. So you will buy probably the 2021 annual collection, $80. The 2022 quarterly packs were $110. You kind of can't go to the post office and buy one stamp anymore. A, they're self-adhesive, so that doesn't work. And B, you got to buy 10 or 12. So you kind of can't do that anymore. Now, the other problem or issue, I shouldn't call it a problem, with the annual packs or the quarterly packs is they will include stuff that you quote-unquote don't want to collect. What's in the pack determines what you collect. So the annual packs and the annual collection will include die cut to shape as opposed to the booklet die cut, souvenir sheets, this, that, or the other. Now, I guess if you don't want that stuff, you can always use it to mail letters, but it's kind of if you're collecting mint Canadian stamps, the annual collection or the quarterly packs define what you're collecting for you. Now, Canada Used. You used to be able to collect Canada Used stamps a long time ago, in the 70s maybe. You could expect there weren't that many stamps issued in a year. You could kind of hope that you got a lot of mail addressed to home. There were stamps on most of it. And with friends and family and a place of work, maybe you could collect pretty much all the Canadian stamps issued in a year. There was a time you could do that. The problem, of course, you would have would be the $1 value, the totem pole stamp, for instance. But again, with friends, family, or place of work, you could normally get one of those after a while. Now, the problem now, because now still with friends and family and your place of work, you can probably get all the permanent rate stamps, or close to, with the exception maybe like the The group of 7 stamps with only 180,000 issued and 7 of them, that was probably going to be difficult. But the other problem is going to be the international and U.S. rate stamps. Because, well, for instance, the international rate stamps, you put an international rate stamp on a Christmas card and mail it away, it leaves Canada. And to get one back in Canada, find one used in Canada, is going to be very difficult. Now, the same thing kind of applies to the U.S. rate stamp, but the U.S. rate stamp also has a use in Canada. So with a little bit of luck and friends and family in your place of work, you're probably going to be able to get 1 or 2 of the U.S. rate stamp. And fortunately, Canada Post only issues a couple of these a year. They will issue an international and U.S. rate stamp in the far and wide, and they always do it for the Christmas stamps. So U.S. rate Christmas stamp, U.S. rate far and wide, you're going to have to hope somebody uses it in Canada. And the international rate, you're going to have to find the person you send the Christmas card to, going to have to ask them to mail the stamp back to you next year. So that one is going to be difficult. Now, how does this apply to the USA? Now, I don't have the new USA catalog, but I expect the same pressures on current used stamps are going to be everywhere, including the United States. And intriguingly, when I used roughly the same time periods that I had used in Canada based on British monarchs, I get roughly the same thing happening. Between 1847, when the U.S. started issuing stamps, and 1937, that's 1 to 802, so 802 stamps, 91 years, 8.8 stamps per year. So the Americans were issuing more on average than Canada was. The reason I broke at 1938 is that's when the presidential issue came out, a whole mess of U.S. stamps. And I went to when the Liberty issue came out in 1954. So between 1938 and 1953, 227 catalog numbers, 16 years, 14.2 stamps a year. We're up to catalog number 5739. That's a lot higher than Canada. So 4,710 stamps after 1938. 69 years, 68.3 stamps per year. The first commemorative stamp the Americans issued was in 1893. It was the Columbian issue. They anticipated the Jubilee issue, and they had a whole bunch of rates all the way up to $5. They were explicitly raising money from collectors. And lately, it's not on average of 68 stamps a year. It's more like 120 stamps a year in the United States. Other observations on collecting U.S. stamps, they have more rates that they issue stamps for than Canada does. Canada has the international and U.S. rate, and that's about it. The United States has a 2-ounce rate, an NPO rate, a priority and express mail rate, which go up to $25 for a stamp, global rate, and as I say, about 120 per year. So you're going to have to buy and or trade to get these. But lots are printed and used and available to buy and or trade for. Great Britain. Now we can use the same monarchical scheme that we used for Canada. Catalog number 1 to 233, 1840 to 1936. That takes us through the for 4 monarchs. 85 years, 2.7 stamps per year. George VI, 58 implied stamps, 15 years of reign, 3.8 stamps per year. So the British Post Office, up until 1952, wasn't issuing a lot of stamps, and they had a pretty strict rule. There really were no commemorative stamps. When you want to argue about where the first commemorative stamp appeared, some people will argue that that's well into the Elizabeth's reign after the Wilding stamps, and there were no commemorative stamps before that. But in the reign of Queen Elizabeth, I've lost count, with Machins and souvenir sheets and country definitives and prestige booklets. I've given up. I can't count. It's around 4,900 stamps in 40 years, 122 stamps per year, but I've kind of lost the ability to count. Now, you used to be able to collect British stamps. You could collect the penny black. There were 120 different ones of them. They printed 68 million. There's still 1.3 million left, a lot left, because they got left on the envelope or the letter that was written. The letter and the envelope were the same. So an awful lot of them are still around. And you could do lots of collecting. So collecting stamps started in 1840 with the penny black in Great Britain. In 1969, the Royal Mail started to issue prestige booklets, and the stamps within the prestige booklet, if you are expert enough, you can tell that they are different from the other stamps. So that is another complete area of collection and another complete number of stamps. Now, what Great Britain now does is they issue commemorative stamps in sets. And the commemorative stamps are around 100 a year, ignoring prestige and country definitives and Machins and souvenir sheets. But the commemorative sets are 2 or 6 or 8 or 10 or sometimes 12. And so, for instance, I just saw this on eBay. It was a 2022 set. It was 10 first-class stamps, and it was a set of 10 different firsts, and it sold for $12 US on eBay. That's roughly expensive. The other thing they do, like they did for King Tut, they would have 2 second-class stamps, 2 first-class stamps, 2 £1.85 stamps, and 2 £2.55 stamps. And these are all for the multitude of postal rates they have in Britain, which right now go up to about £4.20. They are European large, European small, international large, international this. They have just many different rates. They print stamps for all of them. They all get mailed out of Great Britain. They're hard to get. And they are, if you can find them now, before 2015 or so, there were dealers on eBay that would have the complete set of 4 or 6. The 8 or 10 appeared more recently, and you could get them, and they were reasonably priced. Now, much more difficult to get if you can find them at all, and quite expensive. So we're getting to the point in Great Britain that used is about as expensive as mint from the Royal Mail. So in summary, it's clearly getting more difficult to collect stamps. To 2022, Canada has 3,000, US just under 5,000, Great Britain 5,200 or even more depending on how you want to count it. The average to 1953 was 4 or 10 or 4. The average now, Canada 44, up to Great Britain 122 when you include all the other Machins and this and that and the other. US averaging 70. I would say, based on my rough count, Canada issuing around 55 a year, US 120 a year, and Great Britain 170 a year. So as a new collector deciding to collect Great Britain, you have the rather monumental task of 5,200 different stamps. So sooner or later, we're all going to have to start narrowing our collecting interests. That we're going to say, well, you know, Great Britain is now too complicated to collect on an annual basis. Maybe I'm only going to collect Machins, and that has an end date now. A new collector is probably going to have to narrow their collecting interests from the start. And the other thing is the post office is selling collectibles, and we think these collectibles are going to be worth a bunch of money, and we should think about the price we pay for collectibles when we buy them at the thrift store. So if you want to buy a post office collectible because you'd really like to have it, that's marvelous. But if you think that sooner or later you're going to be able to resell it for more than you paid for it, think about the collectibles you just bought at the thrift store. So it's harder. You could collect the penny black. We started collecting the penny black. There were lots and lots of them. There were 120 different. You always had to buy mint. As I said, up until, I don't know, 1970, you could collect domestic and maybe another country or two. You could collect Canada, and you could trade with a collector you knew in the States to get the U.S. Maybe then after that you could trade, but because the U.S. has so many higher rates than Canada does and so many more stamps than Canada does, it's going to be difficult to trade for that. And we're getting to the point now where, as a collector, if you want U.S. stamps other than your own country, where you're going to have to work at that a bit, you're going to have to buy stamps. So, thanks for listening.